Hello, grade 11. I wish and hope everybody is doing well during these strange times. Welcome to our new e-learning platform here on Google Classroom. It's very amazing. I hope that all of you take the opportunity to get to know how to use this platform. As if some of you plan on going to the university, you'll find that a lot of your classes will be conducted in this way. You'll be required to submit things on a website like Google Classroom. So I would advise to maybe try and take advantage of this and get to know how to use it. So our plan of action is to hopefully carry on as we normally do, but just it will be done so through this online platform here, and hopefully you can see me on the video and I can explain PowerPoints. And if you have any questions, everything can be conducted here on Google Classroom. You can ask questions, I can respond to them. We can do all kinds of things here. This is basically a virtual classroom. We can do anything that we normally do inside the classroom right here and online. So it's an amazing piece of technology. Anyways, my goal for this lesson is to continue and finish chapter 29, which concerns World War I, and I want to try and get through section 4, which talks about mainly the Treaty of Versailles, and that was the treaty that brought an actual end to World War I. So, I know 11A, you've probably seen this video before, or this PowerPoint before, I'm sorry. 11B you have not, so 11A, just bear with me here for a little bit. So, here's what we're going to do. We have 5 main themes, okay? And the first thing that we're going to talk about is, let me back up a minute. Our main focus of this lesson is going to be on the Treaty of Versailles, okay? So I know if you've looked in your book in section 4, a lot of it covers something that's called President Wilson's 14 points. And I hope to come back to those later. But my main focus here, I really want to focus on the Treaty of Versailles because this is an extremely, extremely important moment in history, not only for Europe, but for the rest of the world, okay? So this is going to be our focus of the lesson. And it's going to be broken down into these 5 themes. The first theme, it's where did the treaty negotiations take place? Okay, we can talk about that briefly. But more importantly, theme 2, this is very important. Who was involved in these treaty negotiations? Who was there and who were making the decisions? This theme here will actually shape the course of European history and world history for the next 80 years or so, or you can even argue into today, into our current time. It has had serious implications on the course of history. The third thing, how did the treaty negotiations unfold? Theme 4, again, another very, very important theme that we need to discuss is what were the outcomes and provisions of the negotiations. So what did the Treaty of Versailles do? And again, this would have serious ramifications for the future of Europe and the world. And theme 5 we might come to in another lesson because this theme in itself, we could have, an entire, seminar or entire semester on why the Treaty of Versailles was flawed and how the Treaty of Versailles actually can be blamed for the outburst of World War II. My intention was to give you this lesson in class with an actual group activity that would actually have you simulate the negotiations of the Treaty of Versailles. However, as you can see that we're not in school, I have posted the activity in the Google Classroom, in our Google Classroom. So if you want to check it out, I highly recommend you checking it out. It's really cool. You pick a perspective you pretend like you're one of the world leaders that are in the negotiations, and you simulate how you would negotiate. So, anyways, we'll begin. So, just to begin our lesson, just a brief overview. You already know this, but I want to give it to you again. So, basically, what is the Treaty of Versailles? So, the Treaty of Versailles officially brought to an end the state of war between Germany and the Allied powers. If you remember the lesson in Section 3, the lesson on Section 3, fighting stopped through an armistice. If you remember, an armistice just stops fighting. Armistices don't end wars. Treaties end wars. So the Treaty of Versailles ended World War I, and it only happened after 6 months of intense negotiations between the Allies. Okay, between the Allies, and we're gonna talk about this. This is a very important point. And as I mentioned previously, so much ink has been spilled on the Treaty of Versailles, and it's often cited as being responsible for the outbreak of World War II. So the outbreak of World War II and beyond, even into the imperialist world, it's had serious ramifications. So let's get into it. Theme 1, where did the treaty negotiations take place? Again, this is very basic, but the Treaty of Versailles was hammered out at what was known as the Paris Peace Conference. So they stopped fighting. Okay, let's get together, let's work out a treaty, and let's end this thing. And they did this at the Palace of Versailles, which is just outside of Paris. So we're in a suburb of Paris, and we have something called the Paris Peace Conference, which began on January 18th, 1919. So, well, with that basic theme out of the way, let's jump into the major ones. And theme 2, this is a major point here. So, who was involved in the treaty negotiations? So, initially, there were 32 delegates invited. So 32 countries sent representatives to this Paris Peace Conference. They were saying, hey, look at us, everybody's involved here. However, that's not how it went down. Despite a seemingly diverse delegation, major decisions were made by France, Great Britain, USA, and Italy. And as you can see, I have in parentheses for Italy, kind of, because it was more of just like a formality that Italy was there to kind of keep Italy happy. But what I would say is that France, Great Britain, and the USA were the big players here. They were the one calling the shots, as you would say. And it just wasn't anybody who was representing France, Great Britain, USA, and Italy. It wasn't some like ambassador or some, we'll send this delegate or whatever. It was the heads of states, like the president or prime minister. These were the ones who were there deciding the future of what would become Europe and basically, colonial territories. So these heads of states were known as the Big Four, as I would actually refer to them as the Big Three, because, again, Italy really didn't matter here. But you have George Clemenceau from France, David Lloyd George from Great Britain, Woodrow Wilson from the USA, and Vittorio Orlando from Italy. However, if you see the next point, which is quite shocking, Germany and Russia were not represented. So Germany had no say whatsoever on how things would unfold in negotiations and what people recommended be a part of the treaty. They had no say in this. So it goes back to the point of the first slide. The Treaty of Versailles was decided by the Allies. The Central Powers had no say in it. And Russia was not represented simply because the Allies said, well, you pulled out of the war, and also the political situation inside of Russia was dire. You had revolutions going off left and right. By this time, the Bolshevik Revolution had taken full control of Russia, and they had They actually, I believe, they declined to attend the negotiations. So again, just to recap, France, Great Britain, USA, no Germany or Russia at the Treaty of Versailles. This is, as you will see, this will have serious implications for what happened in the future. So here's just a visual of the big three. On the left here you see Woodrow Wilson, the 19th President of the United States, George Clemenceau of France, and David Lloyd George of Great Britain, and these are the big three. These are the ones who really harshly negotiated the Treaty of Versailles. So that takes us into theme 3. How did the negotiations unfold? The negotiations, like we said before, began on January 18th, 1919, and they concluded on June 28th, 1919. Interestingly, and kind of strange, the treaty was signed 5 years to the day after Franz Ferdinand was assassinated, and I know we all remember who Franz Ferdinand was. So 5 years to the day of that incident in Belgrade. And as I said before, the negotiations took place between the victors of World War I. So it's important to remember that as these negotiations are unfolding, Germany had no say in what was being discussed. And in terms of the negotiations, initially, nobody agreed on anything. They were at what we would call a stalemate in terms of negotiations, going nowhere. Everyone rejected Wilson's 14 points, which we'll talk about later, and I encourage you to explore them in the book to get a better idea of what they are. However, what came to the surface in these negotiations and why these countries, or allies, we should say that the allies, the big three, couldn't agree on anything is because they wanted the treaty prescriptions to be in their own national security interests and about the Germany question. So we want this treaty to be in favor of our own international interests and what to do with Germany. Each country kind of had a different view on what to do with Germany, although they were basically ultimately blamed for the war. And as you can say, that's kind of strange because we remember it kicked off between a beef between the Austria-Hungarian Empire and Serbia. So Germany's getting the short end of the stick here. And the negotiations were very harsh, they were very intense, and at times seemed like a stalemate because each leader had their own agenda for their country. And when that happens, it's very difficult to agree on things. And this is what was happening at the Paris Peace Conference. So, and this is in your book, the negotiations unfold. So eventually, these leaders of the big three or big four, or however you want to call them, they actually come to some agreements here. And let's take a look at them. So if we look at territorial losses, and we can see how badly Germany gets the short end of the stick here. For territorial losses, Germany had to return territory that they had gained from France. So Germany had to return this land to France that Germany had gained through something called the Franco-Prussian War in 1870. So not only did they had to give this land back, the French border also extended more deeply into Germany across the Rhine. So furthermore, Germany also had to surrender all of its overseas colonies in Africa and the Pacific. So if there's any type of territory or colonial territory that Germany had, they had to give it up. And as we'll see in later chapters, it's mainly, Great Britain and France who get to control these territories. If you remember German East Africa, I believe that was actually given and carved up by the British. So moving right here on this chart, we can look at military restrictions. What the Treaty of Versailles said and what the Germans had to do as a result of the Treaty of Versailles is that they had to limit the size of their army. So they could only have so many troops in their infantry, things like that. Germany was also prohibited from importing or manufacturing weapons or war material. So not only did they have to limit the size of their army, they couldn't make any weapons or bring any weapons in. So you're seeing basically what we would call, the breakdown of the German army. So they're basically dismantling the German army. And if we remember to our previous lessons about the U-boats and the unrestricted submarine warfare, of course, that scared everybody. So Germany was forbidden to build or buy submarines or build airplanes, which now at this time are becoming, people were starting to now realize the use of airplanes. If we move right, we can look at war guilt. So what the Treaty of Versailles said is that the sole responsibility of the war was placed on Germany. Germany, you are to blame for the war, so you must pay. So the negotiators, those heads of states that I showed you before, they agreed that to the Allies, Germany would be forced to pay $33 billion in reparations over a 30-year period. So because you are blamed for the war, Germany, you will pay us $33 billion over 30 years. Okay, you can imagine how economically devastating that could be to Germany in an already war-torn country who's already shattered economically. So let's move all the way back to the left, because I want to talk about the League of Nations. Also, this is also a very important point, what the Treaty of Versailles did. It created something called, and this was proposed by President Wilson. The Treaty of Versailles formed something called the League of Nations. So basically what it was, it's an international peace organization. However, it excluded some states or countries like Germany's and neutrals. But what it intended to be, I guess you could say, is kind of like an international police force. So when there's an independent rogue state causing trouble, which they blamed Germany for in World War I, a country can bring a dispute or something against the state to the League of Nations, and the League of Nations would act against this rogue state. It was meant to deter countries from going on, war campaigns. However, the League of Nations failed miserably, because obviously we had World War II. However, what the League of Nations created a model for was the United Nations, and we all know what the United Nations is, the UN, which would come after World War II. So this was actually you could say the precursor, the prelude to the United Nations. So that's basically what happened in terms of the outcomes of the Treaty of Versailles. And I think for that lesson, we will stop. So I would like you to visit the book, read about what I have talked about here, chapter 29, section 4. And I hope that was clear. And if you have any questions, direct them strictly to the Google Classroom site, because it's an amazing platform where we can initiate discussions, you can ask questions, and all that good stuff. And again, I encourage you to log on here and use this, and I hope that we can continue learning here, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again once we get through these uncertain times. So thank you.